Welcome to This Week in Common Sense, starring Paul Jacob. So we're sitting here on the last Friday of August 2020, and you're preparing your mind to relay to the people out there in listening land and watching land what you've been doing this week, vis-a-vis your writing on thisiscommonsense.org. So what have you got going?
Well, I was about to tell him about the lawn and how I had mowed and different things like that. But you're talking about politics. I was just thinking today that next week will be this kind of eerie week. We've had the Democratic convention, which, I have to say, maybe I'm kind of a naive doofus guy or something, but I like watching these conventions, and I don't, it's not like I watch gavel to gavel, but when I was 8 years old, I moved to Arkansas from New Jersey. This is my life story. It should just take a couple seconds. No, but I moved. I was 8 years old. It was the middle of the summer of '68. And so we get to Arkansas and it's, a zillion degrees and we don't see anybody out and our family's fairly political, and we watched the entirety of the Republican convention and we watched the entirety of the Democratic convention. Of course, that was a pretty historic Democratic National Convention, and with all the riots and police brutalities and so on in Chicago. And that was back when conventions kind of like you felt like something might actually happen there other than an infomercial. And so last week we had the Democratic convention. I watched very little. Almost everything I watched after the fact on YouTube or wherever. And I don't know. I just didn't get the feel. It's and then the Republican convention. I was interested in a few of the speakers, but I still haven't really caught up on it. And of course, I've known, for decades, really, that the conventions, nothing's going to happen there, really. They don't allow real deliberation and a democratic process to really unfold there. It's all kind of fixed by that time, usually. And so it kind of feels like, we went through these conventions, but they were so obviously what they've been for a long time, which is infomercials. And of course, I don't know, there's a lot of complaints you could make about Trump as president, but as a fireworks expert, there is nobody I'd rather have than Donald Trump. I don't know if people watched after his speech last night, but I happened to be watching that part of it, and my wife and I were trying to figure out, are they just replaying it over and over again, or is this like the longest, most amazing fireworks show ever in history? And I like fireworks, but my goodness, this was like beyond anything you'd ever seen. And Washington Memorial or Monument in the background, and it was amazing. Anyway, we've had both conventions. I don't think there's going to be much of any political bounce, because it's just we're in a different place, and they weren't very exciting, really. And now we're going to have a week of no convention. We'll probably have some good riots and looting, maybe. Maybe police will open fire on a few more people, but there's not going to be the political conventions. And then all of a sudden, it's Labor Day, and off we go to Election Day, and you just don't know what is going to happen. It would not be surprising to be surprised about 5 or 6 different times. And maybe that's the lead up to our first commentary of the week, which was Biden's big lie. Because, part of the reason that things are so in flux and nobody knows what to expect next is that we're not dealing with truth. We're dealing with all kinds of shades of falsehood. And of course, if you're not a fan of the president, he's lied. You've calculated every lie, and I'm sure he has lied. But it's you calculate every little misstatement as a lie. And so there's that. But it dawned on me listening to Biden's acceptance speech, and it mirrored his original announcement speech many, many months ago, was predicated on saving the country from racist President Donald J. Trump. And the reason that Biden knows that Trump is a racist is because he said there were good neo-Nazis, there were good white supremacists, there were very fine people who were on the side of the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis. And of course, if that were true, it would be some damning evidence on President Trump. But it's not true. And we have all this media apparatus. We have all these universities turning out people who can think critically. We've got people who are more engaged in politics, for good or for ill, and I think it may be for ill, than ever before, it seems like. And the truth just escapes. And the big lie works. And here's a good, I think, case in point. So I hear this and I think, now wait a second. I've never thought this is true about what Trump said about Charlottesville. I thought at the time it was clear that they're twisting this. And so, but I wanted to document it, of course, because I'm writing a commentary and I just can't, I would like to always shoot from the hip, but I actually try to be competent every once in a while for you. And so I bet I spent 3 hours, 4 hours over the course of 2 days looking at videos and articles and different things to try to determine who said what when, how Trump had originally stated it, how he stated it later. And basically, the only time he used the term very fine people, he sandwiched it in between, making it absolutely crystal clear that he's not talking about white supremacists. He's talking about people who don't want statues torn down. And you can agree or disagree with those people, but you don't have to be a white supremacist or a neo-Nazi to have, had a grandfather who fought, or a great grandfather. I guess now it'd have to be great grandfather. Whatever it is, you could think, geez, this is just history. I have to say personally, I almost could care less. I don't like the idea of just tearing down statues all the time and, recreating the world every minute in somebody else's new image, or having to pay for any of that. I mean, I think we have too many statues as it is. But I'm not wed to any of these Civil War statues, and I'm not, it just seems to me that this is the height of kind of silliness. There's a lot of serious problems. And I don't mean to say that there's no importance to this, because it is important to people, and therefore it's got some importance. But we've got bigger fish to fry in this world than whether, Colonel Gillespie's, who nobody knew of anyway, is sitting on a horse outside some courthouse. The reality is there are good people on both sides of the statue issue. There aren't a whole lot of good people who are mixed up in white supremacism or neo-Nazism, or frankly, there aren't a whole lot of good people messed up in Antifa and Marxist revolution and so on. So, not that occasionally some good people don't get mixed up in those things, but by and large, no. And what was interesting is Thomas Knapp, who is a friend of mine, libertarian fellow, good guy, smart guy. He objected to what I had to say. And a lot of times, and I appreciate it. Tom, if you're listening, I appreciate it because he holds me to account. And of course, I like to think I'm right more than I'm wrong. Ha ha ha, Tom. But it's good. It's great to have that. But I think here I was right. And I want to talk about what he said and my response, because again, it should not be this difficult for people to find out what was actually said or not said and when it was said. And I think the difficulty is not in my head, it's not in Thomas Knapp's head, it's not in the public's heads. It is in a political class that is expert at spin and a media that has decided to join sides and play that same game. And it just every time I think about it, I get a little sicker. It's a really, I think we're in a what I hope is a very unique time, but a dangerous time, because the partisanship and the corruption of politics, and I'm not talking about criminal corruption, although there's some of that too, but the intellectual corruption and the win at all costs and the let's tell them a lie because we can't really trust them to make the right decision if we give them the facts, that invades our politics, and it has invaded our media watchdog on politics. So now we need a watchdog for the watchdog for the watchdog. So, but Thomas Knapp took exception because I said it was unequivocal that what Trump said, and I guess first I'll just read quickly. I think everybody's heard this in one version or another, but that's part of the problem, is that they've heard it in different versions, and so I'm trying to find my little note here where the heck it is that he said it. But the president, here's exactly what he said. I found it. How do you like that? And you had some very bad people in that group, the president explained to a reporter. And he was talking about the neo-Nazis who had come to demonstrate in Charlottesville. He had earlier talked about bad people on both sides, which is also true. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group who were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. Trump then asked, and I think he kind of saw where things were going. He mentioned that George Washington was a slave owner and asked the reporters, who might have seemed to him like they were enemies, throwing questions at him, that they were on the other side because he was sensitive. Are we going to take down statues to George Washington? And I think we all know that if we're having this discussion about taking down Confederate, colonels and generals and so on, who fought in a war that determined what slavery, whether there's going to be slavery. Certainly someone who owned slaves, that's kind of that was the problem. We got a bunch of presidents who did. Anyway, he goes on to say, it's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture. And you had people, and then he clarifies, and I'm not talking about neo-Nazis and white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. And I said to that quote, unequivocal. And Knapp says, sure, if you ignore the fact that he called the Nazis, quote, fine people one day and didn't change his story until he was called on it the next day. The people trying to put over the Charlottesville hoax, meaning we're calling it a hoax, but that's a hoax. So many hoaxes in this world. It's a great word. Pretend that the two opposing statements took place in line, that the second was an immediate and unprompted clarification of the first. In fact, the second was a later attempt to weasel out of the implications of the first. It's disappointing to find Paul, that's me, either among the Charlottesville hoaxers or fooled by them. Now, I don't really like to be fooled, but if I ever do anything wrong, it was because I was fooled, not because I'm a bad guy. I like to be foolish better than bad. But here's the thing. Now, this is right after I spent all this time trying to figure this out myself. And I thought I already knew, and my recollection of it was fairly correct. So I pointed out that I'd put a link into it. You can see the full thing, and his it wasn't a correction, but his clarification that he's not talking about them came in real time. If you go to thisiscommonsense.org and you go to Biden's big lie, you will see that link and be able to see it yourself. And it's in living color. It's right there, and it's in real time. But I think what fooled Tom, and again with a cast of thousands, spinning this as Trump not saying it good enough, and this and that, and he's a racist and so on. But the day before, Trump had said that there were basically he condemned bigotry and violence on many sides. Violence on many sides, in quotes. Bigotry was also something he mentioned. And people didn't like that because, and of course, Trump is trying to call out Antifa. And let's just take a tangent point here. We wrote about Antifa some time ago when they were beating people up in Berkeley, California, and preventing speakers and burning, causing $70,000 or $100,000 worth of damage on the campus and so on. There has been, it just seems to me, maybe I'm jaded, but I don't think so. And I think that there has been a tremendous resistance to calling out Antifa. You know, I remember, and we did a commentary, I don't remember the name of it, but again, if you go to thisiscommonsense.org and use the search function, who knows? It's Robert Wright. And I remember when he came out, he was on CNN or somewhere, and he says, well, this wasn't Berkeley students. These were agitators from somewhere else. Which, of course, you know, there's 24,000 students on the Berkeley campus, so how you would know that. But of course, then in doing a little research, I find out that days later, there are letters published in the Berkeley student newspaper of students claiming they were there and claiming they did all kinds of things to stop and silence Milo Yiannopoulos.
Milo Yiannopoulos, yeah.
Yeah.
And Ben Shapiro was in the mix at some point too. I don't remember which one.
He was, I think he was later, maybe.
Well, he's been around.
But he's had the same problem. And of course, it's not unique to Berkeley and so on. But in all these cases, there is a reluctance to call out people somehow because of their politics. And I wouldn't be shocked to find there's a reluctance on the right to call out somebody on the right. But you and me, and you know, and a dog named Boo and everybody else, we don't have to play that game. We can call it all out, and it's dangerous again. And I'm criticizing the media because I think this is the low point of the fourth estate in the United States of America. But they have been weak in calling out Antifa because they're too busy trying to decide who they like better, Antifa or Milo. And you know what? Your audience, your readers, your listeners, your viewers, they just want to know the facts. Stop worrying about what you think so much and tell us what is happening. Truthfully, be nice. Anyway, I do think that this bodes very poorly for this campaign. You're going to see, I think, all kinds of people blocked from speaking out, with people claiming that they're not telling the truth. And, you know, truth is a hard thing to decide every day. You have some, you know, monopoly on and can determine every statement and whether it's truthful or not. And we have, we've really so moved away from the idea of this robust debate where all voices are heard, even some loony voices, because the truth is those loony voices, they get heard no matter what. They, you know, we need everybody's voice heard. That's the key. And so I think you're going to see Facebook, Twitter, you know, the social media, YouTube, all those problems. You're going to see I think the news media, the major media outlets, much more aggressively anti-Trump, as if that's even possible. And you're going to see the reverse of that on Fox, as if that's even possible. And and I think that I think we're going to be, either Biden or Trump is going to win in November, and I don't think it's either one. I think we're headed to a lot more trouble, and that's sad. I have to admit I'm more scared of Biden than I am of Trump. I don't know that I would have thought that in 2016 before Trump was president, and I have to admit that part of that is the fact that I know the news media will be tremendously tenacious and aggressive in the watchdog role over Trump. I have no such confidence that they will have the same tenacious outlook if the president is Joe Biden, or if the president is Joe Biden for a few minutes and then Kamala Harris. So I had to think. I had to think to make sure I said her name correctly. Anyway, it's easy, if you think, but it's hard otherwise.
Well, that was very nice of you. All that's very nice. I don't really look at what the media does with Trump as a watchdog. I don't really look at what they're doing as watchdog. I consider them to be fantasists, disinformation artists. To me, they're wholly owned subsidiaries of the CIA by this point. I'm not saying that they are owned, but they sold their minds to that mindset. So I don't look at them as watchdogs at all anymore.
Well, and they're not playing that role, but they do function as that, in the sense that Trump does have to worry that anything he does is going to be known and publicized, and of course that has a effect deterring bad behavior that I think the next president and the president before Trump didn't have that check. Now, I think the media, they were fluffing Obama's pillows and so on, the famous Saturday Night skit, which was darn accurate. And then they get Trump, and it's, off the charts. And I'm afraid they will go back to doing no such role. The problem is, I don't like the narrative that the New York Times has or the Washington Post has. I like the narrative, for instance, I get the Epic Times now. I like their narrative, but they all have a narrative. And you have to be careful when media has a narrative. When they have a narrative, they're not providing news in a journalistically objective fashion. They're just not. And, we could question whether people are even capable of being totally objective, but they're not trying. And so I think we have to recognize that. And the problem is also that you can have a little bit of a narrative and still be functioning in a journalistic way, but over time that the narrative takes over, and especially when you get your nose out of joint. Because Trump has attacked, like I remember in 2016, I'm going to forget the guy's name, in Larry Sabato, who's a political science professor at the University of Virginia. I think it's Larry. I could have his first name wrong. If it is, if I do, I'm sorry. But Sabato, Sabato, is a well-known political science professor and so on. And they were talking, this was during the 2016 campaign. I believe I did a commentary on it. Again, you can go to thisiscommonsense.org, and in the search function, put Sabato in, and you'll find this. But he argued, look, the media has always been liberal, pro-Democrat. They've always slanted against the Republicans. And I thought that was so kind of straightforward and honest and true. But they have slanted so much more than I think they ever had. And part of it is that Trump has attacked them Republicans have kind of always taken it and moved on. They realized, look, I don't buy ink by the barrel. I don't want to be attacking the media all the time, and so, they didn't. And Trump has made a frontal assault on the media, and I think there are times where he's attacked them for things that that were true, and that maybe he didn't like being printed. And I think there are clearly times that he has attacked them for things they have printed that turned out not to be true. So there's some blame on both sides there, but it's just the sort of thing that it has become personal, I think, between the media and Trump. And that's not good. That's not how we want the media to be. I have to say that the first script was about Biden and whether our president is a neo-Nazi. The second script, we just went straight to the neo-Nazi, who happens to be a Democrat, or I should say, he's not a Democrat. He's going to vote for the Democrats. And I guess this is very funny to us, but maybe we should explain to our studio audience and all the people out there in America that basically Dinesh D'Souza got kind of tickled because, I don't know if we discussed it before, but back in 2016, somebody with the Ku Klux Klan came out and endorsed Trump. David Duke endorsed Trump, I believe. David Duke was with the White People's Party and so on, and was almost became governor of Louisiana many years ago in the 90s, when someone came out with a bumper sticker that said, "Vote for the crook," meaning Edwin Edwards. It's important in order to defeat David Duke. But anyway, I digress. We also had, of course, the Communist Party that came out and endorsed Hillary Clinton last election. Now, you probably didn't hear about the Communist Party because I didn't get nearly as much press, but the KKK and others got a lot of press with Trump. Well, Richard Spencer is an alt-right kind of neo-Nazi type guy, and he's kind of the David Duke model, wear a suit, talk intelligently, and be a fascist. And so he came out and said he was endorsing Joe Biden and was going to vote for Joe Biden. And interestingly enough, socialism, whether it's National Socialism, which was Nazism, or fascism, or it's, the more communist variety of socialism, it's the government either owning or controlling the means of production. It is the antithesis of the private ownership of the means of production in what might be called a free market or free market capitalism. Now, state capitalism is kind of the new model is China, where there's private ownership until the government tells you they'd like it delivered to them today. And so, there's all kinds of different things. But so it's not shocking that Richard Spencer is not repelled by big government socialism or big government Bidenism. But he argued, and I thought this was pretty humorous, that the reason he supports Biden is because of competence. The Democrats are more competent. And boy, I'll tell you, to just think about somebody trying to determine whether the Republican politicians or the Democratic politicians are more competent, because that's not a word that I would ever associate with either one. I mean, it's just such a joke. And I point out in this that, of course, no matter how much you think Trump has messed up the pandemic response, and oftentimes by not being more authoritarian and big government about it, but surely that doesn't make the Democrats competent, because, of course, preparing for the pandemic was not very well done. And again, that shocked some people. Sure didn't shock me. Tim, I don't think it shocked you one iota that they're not prepared. The truth is, it's tough to prepare for things that don't happen very often. People just aren't very good at that. And government is bad at preparing for anything. Government is spending the money that will be made 6 months from now already, or the money that'll be made, what am I saying, 6 months, 60 years from now. They've already spent some of that money. So preparing for disaster, no, they're not even prepared, to do today's business today. So anyway, I thought it was funny. We had some chuckles that maybe the confidence is showing because this time they've pulled a alt-right superstar. I use that word ill-advisedly, named Richard Spencer's endorsement, which who does that help? It's got to help the Republicans.
That we didn't mention the title of the piece.
Oh, that's what is the title of the piece?
Voting like a neo-Nazi. That's from
Yes.
Tuesday.
Yes.
And Wednesday's was It's Never Too Late to Prep. So now you've gone from neo-Nazis to the world is ending.
Well, and in this view that somehow anybody who actually prepares is a terrible, rotten person, which is tied to this because this is all about that, there are hoarders, and that if you are hoarding stuff or buying up supplies any more than you need, you're a terrible, rotten person. But of course, nobody is more popular in a pandemic or any disaster than the person who has purchased and secured. They don't have to purchase, but just secured materials that we all need, especially if they're willing to give or sell them to us for a price we can afford. And we get so much of this anti-hoarding and price gouging and all that type of stuff. But, the reality is we can all prepare for all these things, or sometimes we don't prepare. And boy, that can be an absolute life-ending disaster. So when we have, and look, it's not easy. I didn't know there was going to be a pandemic this year. I didn't know a lot of things that were going to happen. I didn't know that, a tree was going to fall and we're going to have to pay to get it taken out. All kinds of things happen. You can't prepare for all of them. But to not be prepared when Mother Nature or something else happens that is disastrous, and then to somehow hold it against the people who did prepare and who not only prepared for them, but are ready to sell you what you need now when you're in this crisis and otherwise don't have it. That's called envy and jealousy. It is not pretty. And more and more you see that enabled, and you see it's sort of I deserve everything handed to me, as if not only were you supposed to secure all these things I need now that this disaster has hit and I was clueless about it, but you're supposed to then just give them to me free, as if your life didn't matter, as if all the work you did to think ahead should just be dashed and I ought to get whatever I want right now. And, look, that tends to then lead to thinking, well, we need somebody who's powerful, who can make sure that we have all the stuff we need. And that's big government. And if you want that sort of society, they're all over the world, various degrees. But if you're looking for a society in which the powerful from on high make the decisions and provide you everything you need, there are Mandarin cards that you can order in the mail. There are courses all over. Even in the United States, you can take courses. I understand some of these Confucius Institutes and stuff, they will provide you Mandarin courses. You can be part of the great experiment being conducted by the Chinese Communist Party. But if you're living in the United States, you've chosen almost and maybe you didn't choose it, maybe you just got stuck here, but you're in like the worst possible place to decide that you want people on high to make all your decisions for you, because we've been going that opposite direction. Well, at least until this pandemic. Well, maybe not. Maybe not, but we've just been lonely, Tim.
Yeah, okay.
You and
Yeah.
I have. No, it is this is something we talked about it before with different, smaller crises and so on. Um, but there's two aspects of it. It's the dismissal of the hard work other people have done to think ahead, who are helping you out, and acting like instead of them helping you out, they're somehow hurting you. And then there's also this idea that some magical force is supposed to take care of every little need you have. And, look, sometimes we all have that. We get stuck in some situation where we're thinking, hey, is this all my fault? Somebody, what happened? Why is this? Why didn't I see this coming? And we can blame other people, but that's that's the kind of thing you do in politics, not in real life.
I was just thinking that this reminds me of a bigger subject, but I guess we really probably shouldn't increase the subject matter in the middle of a podcast that's already 30 minutes in. The next piece, the next day, is about another kind of tragic situation. This time it's not about hoarding, and it's now we're talking about people dying. It's not even very funny anymore at that point.
No, it's not very funny at all. And I read this piece in the Washington Post in the morning. I read the Post in the morning, and it started out saying that the country was being divided over the urgency of bringing fundamental change to law enforcement. And as I want to do, I just thought, I don't think that's right. I don't think we're being divided. I think the country is tremendous. Now, I should maybe step back. People are trying to divide us as best they can, including with lines like that in the lead of the Washington Post story. But we're not divided. We are united. You see the polls. You see the way people talk about this. People of all races, all ages, all political persuasions, they do not like police opening fire and killing people needlessly. Now, this particular case is a lot more complicated than some of them. There was an altercation and so on, but it's still, at the end of the day, I look at it and I think, I don't think the policeman was justified shooting as they did. Again, so let's investigate, let's find out. But instead of pulling us all apart, I think that's the way almost everybody feels. Now, maybe somebody says, oh, I have some more information. I think maybe they were, there was some justification for what they do. People can have those discussions, but nobody is out there in favor of the police just opening fire on people. That's not where the American public is. It's not where the Republicans are. It's not where the Democrats are. And frankly, while some politicians say crap on all sides, and you could argue that some Democratic politicians have certainly made it out to be, hey, these are just all peaceful protests, and, what are you talking about? Let's ignore some of the violence that's going on. Well, violence is violence. We're against the police shooting people to death because that's wrong. We're against people burning people's stores because that's wrong. It doesn't matter what their skin color or politics is. These are simple, basic things that we're united about. And so I kind of wanted to say that. And in looking at stuff, I saw the video of Jacob Blake's mom and dad speaking at a press conference, and especially his mom. I just thought was poignant. Very, very powerful. She took issue with the destruction that she saw on her way to the press conference. And she told people, take a moment and examine your heart. And she made the statement that she has beautiful brown skin, and that everybody knows that, but asked everybody to look at their hand. And she didn't know what color skin you'd have on your hand, but that it was beautiful. I like that. Very simple. And then she also made it clear that in calling for healing and calling for people to come together, that she said, quote, I am not talking to just Caucasian people. I am talking to everyone. And, there's been a lot of Black Lives Matter. And there was a time in which I would be glad to say Black Lives Matter because I think that there has been more discrimination that they've faced. And if that recognizes it, it should be recognized. Let's recognize reality. But of course, I would never be against all lives matter because that's my reality and that should be everybody's, that all lives matter. So there never should have been an argument between the two. But of course, this is America, this is politics. There's an argument between the two. But to me, the problem with Black Lives Matter comes with the website, Black Lives Matter, the actual group, Black Lives Matter, that's not about, in my humble opinion and in my research, is not about ending racism, is not about criminal justice reform. It's about changing our society in some liberal Marxist type vision. I'm not interested in that. I'm very interested in the other, in ending racism, but especially because that's something that, you can't be in everybody's head. You can't wipe out every thought that somebody somewhere on the planet might have, but you can do all kinds of things for criminal justice reform. The country's ready for it. The country's been demanding it really since Michael Brown, who was killed, but who actually was the guy who charged the police in that particular incident. Anyway, I thought that her comments were spot on, and I kind of changed a little bit of where I was coming from with this commentary, just because I thought it was so important to hear her say it. But we are going to continue to have this play out, I think, until we get some consensus among media and political elites that there already is at the grassroots level, which is police brutality is wrong and we've got to find a way to stop it. And burning down buildings and smashing things and destroying innocent people's property is not a solution for it. The country is there. It's there regardless of race, politics, whatever demographic you want to throw out. It's except among the politicians and among the media, which tends to want to stay with their narrative. So I think that I just think we are likely to see what you and I have talked about before, and what we wrote about when it was predicted, or not predicted, I should say, when the study of the 1968 election and the riots and the impact on Nixon's vote versus Humphrey in 1968, the impact was that those riots and those disturbances, civil unrest, helped drive vote to Nixon and away from Humphrey. And of course, as you well know, Tim, and regular listeners will know, there was a gentleman, you may remember his name, I don't, but there was a gentleman who tweeted about this study, and with kind of a cautionary, hey, let's be careful because this study showed, and this was not some big Trump fan, he was saying this study shows these things can be problematic. And of course, we're already hearing some reports that some of the polling in Wisconsin is showing that the race is tightening, and that one of the things driving that tightening, meaning Trump is gaining and Biden is losing a little support in the polls, is the view on Black Lives Matter and on some of the unrest, and the view. And I'm doing this from memory, so I could be off a little bit, but it was something to the effect that a majority of Wisconsin respondents weeks ago had said they had a positive view of Black Lives Matter. I think it was 51 or 56%, something like that, and that had dropped to 30%. So, and they were saying that the one was a driver for the other. In other words, the more you supported Black Lives Matter, the more you were likely to support Biden. The more you were concerned about the unrest, the more you were likely to support Trump.
Yeah, I think that if Trump wants to get elected, you could almost have just one sign up everywhere, and it says no to riots and yes to Trump. All you need is that, and I think that that would probably be enough to get him elected. Uh, because riots aren't popular. Protests are often kind of popular for a while, but riots aren't popular.
No, no, and it's we've had something here, and this is a little tangent too. So this podcast may be a couple months long, but we have had in Georgetown restaurant patrons who are eating outdoors, and in one case it may have been indoors, but and mobs of people come up and demand that they say Black Lives Matter, or they say Breonna Taylor, that they raise their fist, or what. And of course, I don't know about you, but anytime someone demands I say something or do something, I kind of have a knee jerk position, which is no. And if that means that I'm going to get beat up or we're going to fight or whatever, then we're going to fight. I mean, I don't know how else. I'm just not fond of, spending my life, as a robot doing what some mob tells me to do. And it's despicable. It's just absolutely despicable. And there was the Rand Paul episode. He had police around him and had said we need to arrest these people who are threatening people, and suggested that maybe they were being funded to be there and so on. Wouldn't shock me. But and then some people said, well, he really wasn't roughed up. Someone pushed a policeman who nearly fell over and bumped into him, but he wasn't personally attacked, although the reports were that they were saying provocative things like maybe we'll beat the hell out of you or whatever. Threatening type things. That's an assault. And we can kind of say, oh, well, it wasn't, no one actually smashed him in the face. Okay, that's nice of them. But we don't want to live in that society. We don't want to go out to dinner and to be harassed. I don't want even people whose politics I completely disdain to be harassed by people in public and treated meanly or pushed or threatened. Whether you don't touch them at all, but just threaten them, that's not the world we want. And it's boy, I can't think of anything that's more frightening. It brings back, not memories, since I'm not quite that old, but it brings back a bit of history with the Weimar Republic and the this whole idea that how does something like fascism or communism take root? Well, it takes root because you're choosing it over the alternative, which is usually fascism or communism. So far, when those are the two choices, the decision has been terrible every time, and we have to do something to make it to where those aren't our choices. And I think the key is for us, the people, as a collective body, with individuals taking actions to make it so, to be in more control. So everything isn't dictated by a media elite and a political elite. It brings us to our last Friday's commentary. The devil is in the seat cushion. And we're talking here about Nancy Pelosi. And, so often when Trump does something, there's talk about, well, that's unconstitutional or whatever, or that's illegal. And it turns out, well, no, it is actually technically legal because Congress gave the president every known power anytime he wants to use it and stuff like that. But we find out that maybe it's not. But then the fallback is, well, it's destroying norms. It goes against the norms of behavior in the office and so on. Well, one of the norms in a democratic society is that you have elections, and when two people are running for a seat, they debate each other so that the public can see them both arguing things. And in case one of them says something that isn't quite right, the other can come in, and you see how good they are at interacting and thinking on their feet and all those kind of good things. That is the norm. And it's a norm that we ought to hold tight to. I don't think we can force anyone to debate. I don't want to amend the Constitution. I don't want to pass a law. I just want the American people, wherever you are on the spectrum, to say, my guy is going to debate, because otherwise I'm not voting for him. Simple as that. They all debate then. However, all we have heard this time, and Joe Biden, to his credit, has not uttered any of these words. He has said he's up for 3 debates. That's the number that was agreed upon. He's not willing to do more, but he'll do 3. We'll see. Because every other Democrat seems to just can't help themselves but say that there needs to be no debates. Hillary Clinton has said it several times. Now Nancy Pelosi, in a kind of ham-handed way, comes out and tells the press, don't tell Joe Biden, but I don't think he ought to debate. Well, I get it. The Democrats don't think Joe Biden should debate. He probably shouldn't debate, because I don't think he's going to do very well. And I don't think Trump is the greatest debater ever, but Trump can, think on his feet and can respond on his feet. And I don't think Joe Biden is very good at that. Now, there have been some interactions, some speeches he's given where it seems like he's gotten all the words right. He's stayed on message. He hasn't said anything, off, hasn't made a gaffe. But that's different than a debate. And the debates are, I think, a real challenge for him. And I think it's interesting that in all the talk about, that Trump is destroying norms, that the Democrats are ready to jettison the idea that there should be presidential debates. It also kind of points out the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We had an election in 2016 in which both candidates had over 50% negatives. A majority of the country did not like Hillary Clinton. A majority of the country did not like Donald Trump. And yet we had to choose between those two. Now we have Trump as president. Some people have said, hey, he didn't do such a bad job. Other people have said, we've seen him. He's horrible. He's terrible. I'd vote for almost anybody else. And who do we get? We get someone who, I think there are some real issues about whether he is physically up to the job. And we get someone who, frankly, had run several other times and had gotten nowhere, partly because of plagiarism and different gaffes, partly because he's just not a very compelling candidate. And yet, when it looked like Bernie Sanders was not stoppable in getting the nomination, and even though they all seem to endorse all of his policy positions, can't wait to embrace his policy positions, they can't stand the idea that someone who had the socialist label would be running for office and have to speak to that, because I think they know he would lose. And so in a way that I've just never seen the wagons circle as quickly as they did. Just, it seemed like overnight you had multiple Democratic candidates hop out and endorse Joe Biden. And the only candidate who you would have expected to hop out, Elizabeth Warren, because she had, they do polls, they know these things going in. She knew she was going to get her clock cleaned in Massachusetts, her home state. She didn't just lose, she came in third in her home state. So knowing that, why wouldn't she get out? Because if she got out, her votes would go to Bernie Sanders. So she stayed in while everyone else stayed out. Now, do I have all this on tape? No. I'm just saying this is how I see it. Could be right, could be wrong. I'm right. It's obvious. And so, you know, that's it, it's almost unbelievable. Circling the wagons around a candidate because he didn't have the negatives with the idea that we will just all try to protect him from having to answer questions or run a campaign. And of course, this is the year to run if you don't want to have to run much of a campaign, because you can't run much of a campaign. So, boy, real life is stranger than any fiction. And I think we're in for a very interesting next 10 weeks.
Thank you for joining us at This Week in Common Sense, the podcast wherein Paul Jacob talks about the big stories of the week that have appeared on his website, thisiscommonsense.org, where he's been writing commentary since 1999. My name is Timothy Verkula. You can find me at locofoco.us, locofoco.net, and at workman.com. That's Workman with an I, not an O. Paul Jacob can be found at libertyifund.org, citizensincharge.org, and of course at thisiscommonsense.org. That's a lot of orgs. This podcast is hosted at SoundCloud and can be accessed via podcatchers such as Apple's, Google's, and Stitcher. It is of course viewable on YouTube. Come back next weekend, and for the week, go to thisiscommonsense.org.